Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
And what's it gonna do?
It doesn't matter how you're doing. Woo! Wheeling, dealing, limousine right, jet flying.
Can you dig it, sucker?
Would you please shut the hell up?
You don't know what hard times are, Daddy.
The cream will rise to the top. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the human rumble.
What up, what up? Welcome to episode 126 of Keep the Kayfabe. I'm Mike, sitting here with my boys, ready to talk some wrestling. We're getting into the groove of summer. Me personally, this is the first night that I haven't watched hockey in what feels like 2 months because there's no game scheduled. So I feel like I have an off night. And what better way than to sit down with some of my best friends who know a ton about wrestling and cover one of the legends that will be attending Crusherfest this June 3rd and 4th. His name is Ted, the $1 Million Man Dibiase. What a get for them. He is a Hall of Famer. He's got quite the career, but before we get into the deep dive into all of his accomplishments and the great things that he has contributed to the business, let's introduce the boys real quick. He's over in Glendale. He keeps it regal. He is Steve Grobschmidt. What up, Grobby?
Everybody's got a price. Everybody's going to pay because the $1 Million Man always gets his way.
Damn right he does. And I love that you put the laugh in at the end because that was just his signature. I could watch that on a loop. And I think you can on YouTube. It's just $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase laughing. So
It's a thing of
could
beauty,
be fun.
as we'll discuss.
Yep, definitely. Good to see you, Steve.
Likewise.
All right, let's cruise down to Bayview. He is freshly squeezed, and his name is Matt Michelson. How are you, Matt?
Well, I'm great, and to keep things rolling, money.
Wow.
Very nice. Yeah, really keying in on the theme music. We might have to use that for our outro music tonight. It'd only be appropriate. So, how's everything with you, Matt? Good?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to tonight's episode. The $1 Million Man was always there when I was watching WWF as a small kid. Never really knew a lot about his storylines. I knew he had great hair, and that was pretty much it. So I'm curious to see what else there is to him.
Oh yeah, the hair was great. I mean, he was the guy that I always played. You remember that that arcade game, the WWF arcade game?
Yes.
He had like
Yes.
all the greats, but the $1 Million Man, like he was on there with Virgil and Andre the Giant. They made him look great. He was great. He is one of my favorites. I can't wait to talk to him, or excuse me, I can't wait to talk about him tonight, but also maybe an opportunity to talk to him in person at Crusherfest. And then the guy who's lining us up with all the info, who's guiding us on this tour of Ted's career, he's the man with the golden pipes down in Ohio, Gary Williams.
Here comes the money, 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 money. Here comes the money, 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 money. I mean, I had to keep with the theme, so I did Audible because I was prepared to do the $1 Million Man. But Steve and Matt, I gave to you. But then let's go, Shane McMahon. That's the way to go, baby.
So since this is an audio-only podcast, our listeners couldn't see this, but I feel like, Gary, as you did that, you were reading the lyrics off of a screen. At least that's what it looked like on Zoom.
Oh. Well, there aren't many lyrics.
No, there is not.
All my notes are here.
I think you missed the dollar dollar part, but otherwise you nailed it.
I did. Dollar, dollar, dollar. Cha-ching.
That was good. That was very good improvisation. And that's why you're the cleanup batter on this Keep the Kayfabe podcast, Gary, for those quick wits and very kind audibles that you lend to the show. So, yeah, boys. Yeah, like I said, Ted DiBiase was one of my favorites. He was one of the guys that, like, sold the best. He was a great heel. He had the great hair. He had a great distinct gimmick. He's a legend. but there's got to be more to him, right, Gary? How did Ted DiBiase get started in wrestling?
Well, I think, it's important today, as we talk about Ted, that this now is going to be one of those transitions that we're going to make from the previous conversations. I felt like, and I don't know if you'd all agree, but when we talked about Bob Orton and Greg Valentine, they really had pretty rockin' careers, prior to their WWF run. Now, it's not to say that they didn't have successful WWF runs, but their careers really were rocking. And then, they got into WWF. Ted DiBiase had a rocking career before and during. He truly is as he transitioned from the independents and from the territory days, he made huge impacts in the WWF and is still making them today. I would shudder to say that of the three that we've talked about, Ted DiBiase still to this day is maybe one of the most recognizable heels that the WWF has ever had.
Absolutely. I was talking to my dad, I want to say it was a couple weeks ago, telling him about Crusherfest, as Mike mentioned, coming up this June 3rd and 4th in South Milwaukee. Check it out if you're available and in the area. But talking to my dad, I had mentioned some of the names that were going to be appearing at Crusherfest, and I mentioned Cowboy Bob Orton, Al Snow, and he kind of knew those names. And then I mentioned Ted DiBiase, and he got so excited just at the idea that we might be in the same area as this guy.
Yeah.
It's one of those moments where you're talking to one of your parents on the phone. He covers it up. He's like, hey, yells out my mom's name. Guess who's going to be at Crusherfest? Matt might talk to him. Yeah, definitely a recognizable name if it transcends generations as well.
Yeah, and it's funny you had that conversation because I visited my dad today and I was telling him about Crusherfest and the possibilities that we're going to have, who we're going to get to talk to. And I listed off every name. Now, he's a lifelong wrestling fan, so he knew every name.
Mean Gene.
Yeah, Mean Gene. But when I said Ted DiBiase out of all the names, he's like, oh, and he kind of lit up. And it's because I think that makes what he is the big deal. I mean, yeah, I agree. I think he's one of the he's certainly one of my all-time favorite heels. I mean, he was so great. I mean, I was as I've said before, even as a kid, I got tired of Hulkamania before a lot of people did, and I started really migrating towards the heels, like Mr. Perfect and the guys that would take on. But Ted DiBiase to me was just one of the absolute coolest. I love that guy.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back for a little bit. Born 1954, he's the biological son of Helen Nevins, who was a pro wrestler. She was married to an entertainer singer named Ted Willis. They ended up divorcing, and Helen marries Iron Mike DiBiase, and that becomes Ted's adopted. He's adopted by Iron Mike. And what's interesting is Iron Mike has a massive heart attack in the ring and dies. And Ted DiBiase was 15 years old. In fact, in doing some research, Harley Race actually ran to the ring to try to give CPR to Iron Mike, but they couldn't save him, and he died in the ring.
Oh my God. So
again, now we're going to have a theme that seems to run through this generation of wrestlers, which is he's on a football scholarship and he starts to go to school. The name, the school is now known as West Texas A&M University, but back in the day, it was called West Texas State. And I just want to read off the list of notable wrestling alumni from West Texas State: Terry Funk, Dory Funk, Bruiser Brody, Dusty Rhodes, Tito Santana, Tully Blanchard, Manny Fernandez, and Stan Hansen.
I heard of him.
You want to talk about a cradle of wrestlers
Legends, my
and
God.
legends that came out of there.
Wow.
Were they the first college to offer like a Bachelor of Arts in the performing arts?
It's crazy. I mean, and it's fascinating is they all kind of, I think, recruited each other and then like played with each other and then just slowly started to migrate towards each other. Ted DiBiase ends up with a career-ending injury from a football perspective. And so then he hooks up with Dory and Terry Funk and gets a start in the Amarillo territory, which is right in all of that area in Texas. His debut is in 1974. So unlike our previous two, Ted DiBiase knows that his father's or his stepfather's name is a big name. So he does adopt the name and uses it for his ring name, which instantaneously meant he was a babyface and started his career as a very, very massive babyface. He was in the Amarillo territory in 74. From 75 to 79, he goes to Mid-South, which at that time is, you're talking the Louisiana, Oklahoma kind of area. And then in 79, he actually goes up and does work for Vince Sr. A couple really interesting things during that first WWF run. So he was awarded what's called the WWF North American Championship. And there is a story amongst all of this in which basically Pat Patterson, very, very soon after in the 1979 area range, they have this fictional tournament and basically unify the North American Championship and the South American Championship into the Intercontinental Championship. No one's for sure if that match actually occurred, but whatever story they told, Pat Patterson goes to Rio de Janeiro, and next thing you know, he's the Intercontinental Champion. Ted DiBiase, I believe, is known as the very last North American champion. And then the last really important thing that DiBiase had done during this period was he was Hulk Hogan's first Madison Square Garden opponent. And we've talked about, in other episodes, we've talked about the 1980s and then 1981, and we know the Hogan Andre. Hogan started as a massive heel. So imagine this, the very first match between DiBiase and Hogan, DiBiase was the babyface and Hogan was the massive heel.
Not how history remembers those two locking up.
Yeah. And so I think DiBiase then goes into what I would classify as his most formative years of development in terms of his wrestling capabilities between 1980 and 1987. So he's really concentrated only in, so unlike, again, some of the other guys that we've talked about, he really didn't travel around much. He still, because he was in the NWA, while his base was Mid-South, he was doing some other things, and he had a lot of connections in wrestling to Japan. But in Mid-South, that is where Ted DiBiase basically creates this heel persona. He was a huge babyface up until 1982. Simultaneously, though, the other major babyface at the time was Junkyard Dog, and Junkyard Dog was humongous. I mean, you want to talk about,
he was like the Black Hulk Hogan, basically.
He was absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, Mike, you're 100% right. He was everything to everybody down in the South. And so there was a booker in Mid-South, and well, maybe before that. So DiBiase is, getting paired up back and forth. He runs an angle in Georgia Championship Wrestling where he's tag team with JYD against the Freebirds, and the Freebirds give
Not
him
bad.
4 pile drivers, 1 on the concrete. And, he is mortally, I chuckle when I read that, because I think to myself, like, How many times do we see a pile driver today and the guys, not only do they kick out, they may not even go for a cover, but back then, if you were given a pile driver, one, it was barred, right, Steve? It was barred in many promotions, let alone have 4 of them happen to you and 1 on the concrete. Literally, you guys, it said it. There was a quote in this newsletter I read that people were literally in tears for fear of what happened to Ted DiBiase.
Oh, I'm sure. And the way that guy sold, too,
yeah.
like,
he was good.
Oh my God.
That's the type of stuff that would make teams like the Freebirds just like loathed.
Oh yeah, big time.
So DiBiase then returns to Mid-South, and so I thought this was a really cool story. So Ernie Ladd is the booker that's helping Bill Watts in this territory, and basically he turns to Ted DiBiase and he says, Ted, I know you're going out and about into different territories. You're doing some stuff in Japan. While you're out there, I need you to try to find us another heel, because basically they were starting to run out of heel characters for Junkyard Dog and for some of their storylines. So based on the newsletter that I read, basically DiBiase leaves and then comes right back and says, hey, what about me? And Ernie Ladd's like, oh, I don't know about this. Like, you've got your stepdad's name. You're huge. He's like, basically like, I think I can do this. You trust me. And so what do? The rest is history, because in a unbelievably classic moment, he turns on JYD, pins him for the North American title, which in the Mid-South region, the North American NWA North American title was the thing. And it was a scientific match. They were shaking hands. They did everything. And he pulls out a black glove and loads it up and whacks and basically cheats to win. And all hell breaks loose, like all hell. And he goes overnight from being a massive babyface to a massive heel.
Damn. It takes a special maestro to be able to pull off. I mean, I think we had whole episodes about that, but like guys that were epically successful in both regards is just, I mean, it's a small list, which also includes Hulk Hogan. Something we brought up before that I think, it's interesting for people that's world is sort of WWF, either in the 80s or beyond. It's like Junkyard Dog, Coco Beware, The Natural Butch Reed, these guys that kind of went on to be notables, but maybe upper mid card when they were in WWE late in their career. People that only knew them from that don't realize how massive they were before that.
Massive.
Yeah, like even Coco Beware, he was a comedy act. One of you guys like brought him up the other day. He was a huge deal, like main eventer before he was walking around with a bird and losing on the upper card.
And Steve, what's interesting is Mid-South was one of the territories that really got rated hard. But the guys that were in there, I mean, Paul Orndorff, Coco Beware, Rock and Roll Express, JYD, DiBiase forms the Rat Pack, which is like the first heel faction. And it's him, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and a guy named Matt Bourne.
You guys happen to know who Matt Bourne maybe was more known for?
No clue.
Steve?
Doink the Clown.
Doink the Clown.
Which, if you remember that character, he is one of his notable characters.
He was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
A clown and a lumberjack walk into a bar and become professional wrestlers, apparently.
Yeah.
I hear Doink the Clown's getting his own episode on Dark Side of the Ring, season 4 coming
Honestly,
up
that would be a great one,
It would
because
be
Matt
great.
Bourne was kind of a tormented soul.
He
and
was.
I mean I'm not surprised, and I'm also kind of glad they're doing that, because that'll be really interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So it's in this period of time. They do a couple fun angles. They do the classic loser leave town match with JYD, and then he returns under a mask by the name of Stagger Lee. How you didn't put two and two together. Of course, it was this big, hullabaloo. Then they also eventually wore out their welcome with the Rat Pack. And so this is actually really fascinating. So there was a heel manager, very famous from World Class and Mid-South, named Skandar Akbar. And basically he was one of the original kind of like anti-American heel managers. He ends up calling out in this process. In essence, he starts calling out Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who professes himself to be this ultra American, and then Hacksaw makes a turn from heel to babyface, and then he and DiBiase feud. But it's interesting to know because that's the birth of when Hacksaw Jim Duggan started doing all the big American stuff.
There's another guy that most people that know who he is probably could never imagine him as a heel.
Yeah, he was a major heel, and then he became this huge babyface in the Mid-South region. But Steve, to your point, the Natural Butch Reed is in the mix here. Paul Orndorff is in the mix here. Like, all those names are names that are very synonymous with the very first major run in the WWF. And DiBiase was kind of a holdout for a little bit, and then eventually he leaves. And the story, I watched a really cool in-ring interview. It was called For the Love of Wrestling. It was a video interview. It was him and Virgil were interviewed. It looked like it was over in the UK, and he tells some really cool stories that we're going to go over in the next little bit. But basically what ends up happening is right around 1987, he's starting to run, tag team matches with Dr. Death Steve Williams, and they're battling all these. Well, it's at that time that basically WrestleMania 3 is occurring, and everyone is freaking out, and now all heck's kind of starting to break loose. And so a couple things are happening simultaneously. One is the UWF is now sold to Jim Crockett, and Mid-South is sold and now is merged with the NWA, becoming the UWF, which was in essence the end of the road, because the NWA swallowed them up, and they never ever gave that group a chance, which was, in my estimation, a fatal flaw of the NWA, because so many guys ended up leaving there to go to New York, so Ted DiBiase is over in Japan, of which he had been very often had gone over. In fact, he was tag team champions in All Japan with Stan Hansen, who has connections to with him at West Texas State. And so the story goes, according to the $1 Million Man, that basically he's over there, and he opens the paper, and basically he sees WrestleMania 3, 93,000 people, and says to himself, in order for me to be relevant, that's where I need to go. That's where I need to be. And so at the same time, Bruce Pritchard is interviewing up in New York for the Brother Love gig. Bruce Pritchard had come from Houston, Texas area where DiBiase had wrestled, and they had known each other for a long time. DiBiase calls Bruce Pritchard and basically says, hey, I know they know who I am, but float it by him. And basically Pritchard says, not only are they interested, they're super interested. And then a phone call is made between DiBiase and McMahon.
Awesome.
It's so interesting hearing how all this came about, because to your point, Gary, like, he was so successful in all these other promotions around WWF, and which we'll get into here in a little bit, also successful in WWF. The heel turn, I think, is what's most fascinating to me. You talked about that glove, the loaded glove, being all it took for him to make a heel turn. I mean, I feel like I tie modern wrestling into these stories a lot, like over the last several weeks, but here we are again. So in AEW, this stuff happens all the time. And you got to wonder, is it because we've seen it so many times before? Is it because it's overdone now? I have to believe there was an element of it was a special event when it used to happen, because it only happened, what, once or twice in a decade, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about this, though. Remember, you're talking about 1984, 85, 86, 87. And Mid-South was a regional territory. And so you would get it on TV if you lived down there. And so the ability for them to run at that type of angle, that and the loser leave town match and all that other stuff. I mean, remember, kayfabe was real. I mean, they cried when Ted DiBiase had 4 pile drivers. I mean, they bought in.
That's like headline news.
Yeah. And so like for them, the realism was so emotional that and yet it would happen and you would never know if you were in the Carolinas or up in Wisconsin. Like this whole Mid-South kind of thing, like I literally am like rewatching some of it now on Peacock. It's unbelievably good. But growing up, no clue. Steve, I don't know if we didn't have any clue about it. We kind of knew about Memphis a little bit. We knew about the NWA.
Yeah, and we'd occasionally go to the aforementioned hobby shop and get some magazines, and you'd learn a little bit about other stuff. But by and large, you're just in the dark on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So just a different time frame. Like, yeah, it's just like that stuff was far more novel then, and now we've seen it all. We read it all,
and it does kind of suck a little bit. If we can take an aside, Matt, it does kind of suck because in a lot of ways, those types of really cool suspensions of belief are, few and far between nowadays because so many things have been done. We are coming off the heels of another heel turn, a just recent one, right? In AEW. And, I mean, we all kind of felt it coming, and yet when it happened, I'll even say like, I marked out a little bit because I was like, damn, like you kind of knew it was coming, but not sure.
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, does that bring us up to his debut in WWF now?
Yep. Yes. So a couple of really, this was so fascinating for me to listen to behind the scenes. So basically, Ted DiBiase gets on the phone with Vince McMahon, and Vince McMahon's basically like, I have a gimmick that's never been done before, and I think you can pull it off. And so Ted, this is on the phone. And so Ted DiBiase is like, well, what is it? And Vince is like, I'm not telling you, because if I tell you and you don't come here and you steal my gimmick,
I've blown it. Yeah.
It's blown it. And he's like, okay, well, I'll come. And he's like, okay, I'll tell you when you get here. And Ted DiBiase is like, what the hell? Like, what am I going to do? So he goes, yeah. So he now is like, do I do this? Do I not? So who does he reach back to? Is Terry Funk. He calls Terry Funk, and Terry Funk basically says, if Vince McMahon has an idea that he thinks will make you money, you need to not even worry about it, and you need to just go. And so Ted DiBiase is like, so I went. So he calls Vince, says, I'm coming. So Vince says, I want you to bring your wife. We are going to fly you first class, pick you up in a limo, and you're staying at this, such and such, one of the most amazing at the time hotels. And he's like, what's going on here? Sure enough, he flies in, and McMahon like literally rolls out the red carpet in a way that's just beyond, it's just like almost grotesque to him. So he shows up in McMahon's office, and at the same time, parallel, Virgil is on his way to the office, and they both converge on the office at the exact same time. Now, Virgil's name is not Virgil. Virgil was called Virgil because he was in the Memphis territory at the time, and he was the person they chose, But basically, Virgil is a play on Dusty Rhodes. They were making fun of Dusty Rhodes at the time, and
his real first name.
His real first name is Virgil Runnels, and Dusty was known as the American Dream, and so DiBiase's finisher became the $1 Million Dream, and so it was a rib at Dusty Rhodes, like a legit rib.
Why?
I think, we could probably go into that for 2 days too, but basically it was just this kind of like Dusty represented this Booker / larger than life persona figure in the NWA with Ric Flair. And, I just think in a lot of ways they were just poking fun at him because, they could.
He was the competition.
And it was competition. There was a lot of dirty stuff happening at that time. Things from pulling pay-per-views. There was all kinds of stuff, shenanigans going on in '87, and this just happened to be one of them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So McMahon introduces the gimmick, and basically, long story short, Pat Patterson also is somewhat involved, but basically explains to Ted. So Ted DiBiase and Virgil are there, and Vince says, there's nothing worse in life. What's one of the worst things in life? And that's somebody with a lot of money holding it over your head and just flaunting it all the time. Nothing can grate on you more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, you're right. And Vince is like, that's who you're going to be. And from day one, they talked about all kinds of things. But what's interesting is they already knew that Virgil was going to be Ted DiBiase's, bodyguard, whatever. They already knew that talked in 1987 that probably what ends up being I don't know, 10 years later, that they were going to split the two of them up, but they were going to hold that was going to be the culmination of their relationship. They were going to hold it for as long as they could, as long as they were generating heat and stories in other ways. So it was crazy that they were thinking that far ahead at that time. But basically,
patient storytelling is not a thing nowadays.
It's not a thing nowadays. But basically, everything you saw in those vignettes and all that stuff, that was legit. So Vince McMahon said, you will fly first class. You will always ride in a limo. You will always carry cash with you. In fact, Ted DiBiase said, I would get $2,000 in $100 bills from the office. And he said, McMahon said, I want you to go to a restaurant and you are just going to walk in and you're just going to be like, I'm the $1 Million Man and all of these bills are on me tonight. And so he would collect all the bills and stack them up, pay for everything, go back to the office, and he would hand in all the receipts. They'd hand him another stack of another $2,000 stack, and he would go out and do some more stuff.
Man, what a gig.
Yeah, no kidding.
Talk about living a gimmick. And Pat Patterson was the one who basically, he and Ted DiBiase came to the understanding that this actually was the very first iteration of Mr. McMahon. Because this is the person that Vince thought he would be if he was wrestling.
that is something. Yeah.
Isn't that something?
I wonder if people came up to Ted who actually needed money and he had to be an asshole to them.
That's a really good question. And I think, speaking of our list of questions, that would definitely be one I would ask, because he did a lot of different things. So he gets introduced on June 27th of 1987, and he even goes back and cites that those vignettes, that it wasn't until Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the famous basketball angle, which I was at. Steve, I can't remember if you were with us.
I wasn't with you, but my God, I'll never, to this day, ever forget that skit. It's one of the all-time greats.
It was at the Mecca I was up in the top center with Todd Rybecki and Nick Milinovich, other names from our past. We were up there for 3.5 hours watching the whole taping, and that happened. And so basically, what the story behind it is, they got a young African American kid, 5 years old, and his mom, and they got them backstage, and then basically we're like, hey, listen, this is what we're gonna do. What's Milwaukee known for? And they said, well, beer and basketball. So he's like, well, I can't do much beer with you. Let's try basketball. And so they scripted this and they got and rehearsed it. And then they went out, and he's, supposed to dribble the basketball. He does it 10 times. Then he's supposed to do 15. And right before the 15th, he literally kicks the ball away from him.
Oh my God.
I'm telling you, the place, I was there. And to this day, I vividly recall seeing this. The place came unglued, just unglued.
I would have gasped.
It was absolutely.
And the look on the kid's face is just.
He had these crocodile tears. Unbelievable. Okay,
because
so
he would have won like $100 or $1,000.
$500.
$500 if you would have bounced the basketball 15 times in a row.
And he did it
15
14
times in a row. And on the 14th one, he kicked the ball away.
And then super condescending Dibiase. He's like, if you don't do the job right, you don't get paid.
So
it's so great.
It's unbelievable. So the first thing Dibiase, because Dibiase in this interview, he is recalling this as if it happened yesterday. First thing he says is he goes back to the back and everyone's going crazy. Like, he's like, they're getting high fives. They're like, this worked perfect. The kids with his mom, they get the $500. They're all, and DiBiase's like, you guys don't understand. I'm never making it out of here alive. You need to. So they literally had to leave. Like, they had to get him out of there because they were worried that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But, damn.
So then he says,
and that was the 80s. I mean, that was like, not as common then for that kind of fear.
So you guys, if the story gets even better, he says at some point, he's like, I really wish I had met that kid. Like, I wonder what his name is. Well, he flies into Omaha, Nebraska to do a speaking engagement, goes to the car rental, and the guy behind there, who he says he was looking at his chest, says, you don't recognize me, do you? And DiBiase's like, should I? And he's like, my name is Sean. I was the guy with the basketball.
Oh my God. I never heard that story.
He met him in real life. Sean got a basketball scholarship of all things, and ended up
funny.
A manager of a car rental place that DiBiase just happened to be. And then you can see online, there's like, he signs a real basketball to him and does some stuff, but he's like, he just couldn't believe it. But that vignette, you guys, was like lightning in a bottle, and it just went from there. It's crazy. Just crazy.
It's the most perfect heelish thing anybody could do. It's along the same lines. So before, I actually didn't know this happened until recently, this whole situation, this vignette. Back in 2015, I was really into NXT at the time, and I think you guys were too. And I don't know if you recall, there was a segment with Sasha Banks. She had a match with Bayley, and Izzy, one of the big super fans of NXT at the time, was in a crowd with a sign. Sasha Banks grabs the sign from her, tears it up, and then makes a crying face at her and just makes this little girl cry partway into the match. And at that time, that had not been done in years as a gimmick, and it's something I hadn't seen at the time either. This was sort of, I guess, the very first time anything like this had ever happened, so it made it that much more special. It's great even when you see it, for the fifth time. It's still just as shocking, but when you see it for the first time, it's that much more special.
Quite. So from that moment in 1987, that angle on Superstars of Wrestling, he basically becomes the number one heel for the next 10 years. I mean, he goes bazonkers, and he headlines, he goes into this, thing, I'm going to buy the $1 million belt on. Then Hogan, Hogan keeps him at bay. And so he gets upset. And so he says, I'm going to purchase Andre the Giant. Andre's going to get this belt for me. And then on February 5th, 1988, which I remember seeing live on Friday night, it was called The Main Event. Dibiase noted in the interview that I listened to, that was the first time that professional wrestling had been on network TV since the 50s.
Wow.
Live on network TV. But you guys, I don't remember. I should have looked this up, but I want to say it was close to 30 million people watched that episode. It was insane, like an insane amount of people tuned in. And that was the infamous twin referee of Earl and Dave Hebner, and the fast count. And I mean, I was in
and it
awe.
ended Hogan's
awestruck.
first. It ended Hulk Hogan's big first run as the WWF champion. I mean, that was
first loss.
News in and of itself. Yeah, and then the way they did it,
we knew there was no heads up. There's no dirt sheets. There's no internet. There was no like somebody's in the back. I mean, you guys, when this happened, it was like, OMG, literally.
Yeah. I've said it. I think I've said it before on the podcast, but I still think that is one of the by far greatest storylines ever in wrestling, because it was. I mean, they never did that before. That's the beauty of it. I mean, had they ever done a twin referee where they were actually twins? I mean, it's just like perfect.
It's so perfect, and with how big Hulk Hogan was at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Doing something like that on live TV, and like you said, 30 million viewers. That's
33. I just looked it up.
Okay.
The main event took place at 8 p.m. Eastern. The live broadcast drew a 15.2 Nielsen rating, 33 million viewers.
That's incredible. To give some of our younger listeners perspective, at the peak of the Attitude Era, so the late 90s, Stone Cold Steve Austin is at the peak of his career. I think, and I'm going off the top of my head, but I think the highest rating that Monday Night Raw drew in that time frame was about an 8.2, so about 8 million viewers if you think about it. This is what, 5 times that? Unreal.
Unreal. Just unreal. I mean, and it just showed you the mainstream, how red hot they were. I mean, this is off the heels of WrestleMania 3. This is the big rematch. It spurs on then WrestleMania 4, in which Ted DiBiase is then, he's in the main event basically of the tournament against Randy Savage. Interesting note, they actually talked about DiBiase winning. He talks about having this conversation with Pat Patterson, and DiBiase, or Pat Patterson basically says to him, like, do you really want to win? And he's kind of like, well, heels, traditional heels back in the day, the vast majority of them were what were called transitional champions. They were basically there to either, beat somebody so they could get beat, or beat someone so the next, and basically they just, it's not the same, right, as a face champion. And so Pat Patterson and he agree that you're right, like, you're better off losing, so why don't you buy a belt? And so that's when he comes up with this idea to create his own championship, which is the $1 million belt,
which ultimately culminated in 2023, the debut of the Triple B, baby.
That's right. I mean, uncanny. Like, so that was a pretty cool story. He said that the $1 million belt is mainly made of cubic zirconium. There are some real diamonds on the back of it, so that if ever asked, he could say, yes, there's real diamonds in here. At the time, it was worth $40,000.
Wow.
Eh,
Nothing to shake a stick at.
But
yeah.
so basically from there, there's a bunch of, he runs some super interesting angles, wrestling tag teams with, Andre the Giant, the Mega Powers, Mega Bucks. He wins the King of the Ring in '88. He declares himself in '89 the $1 Million champ. He buys the Royal Rumble entrance at 30, gets penalized. He introduces a mainstream movie character named Zeus, and that they were running an angle, right, Steve, for what was the movie?
No Holds Barred. No Holds Barred.
No Holds Barred. Right.
Yep.
Childhood classic.
He introduces Zeus. Then he gets in a feud with Dusty and Dustin Rhodes, and then he introduces the Undertaker. Believe it or not,
That's his other great conception too.
And then And then Virgil finally turns face, which was planned on day one, and it happens in 1991-ish. So almost, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later, he goes into Money Incorporated with IRS, 3-time tag team champion, and then
finally wins gold in WWE.
Finally wins gold, legitimately. And then, you guys, when he's the manager in the WWF from 94 to 96, in January of 96, who is he famously known for introducing? The Ringmaster, better known as Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Boy, he introduced 2 of the absolute greatest of the era. Yeah.
On the Mount Rushmore, basically.
Yeah.
So think about this for a second. He created a heel persona, put over JYD, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. I mean, helped create them into megastars. He basically was the heel figure in the most watched wrestling episode, likely in our generation. He introduced and helped Andre win his only world championship, even if it was only for a moment. Andre is still recognized as a world champion. Dibiase is not, but Andre is. And then think about from Zeus to Undertaker, Virgil, even to
Hacksaw Jim Duggan, he made him a baby face.
The Ringmaster.
Yeah.
Rob Van Dam is known as a young Rob Van Dam in Michigan. They did this angles where he would have people kiss his feet for $100, and Rob Van Dam kissed his feet in Michigan back in 1987. He used to take his boot off and say, "I'll give you $100 if you come kiss my foot." I mean, legitimately. So I say all that because I'm curious your thoughts, but what an unbelievable career.
For real.
Yeah, there's so many tidbits of information I think you shared tonight that I wasn't even aware of. Just the number of names, classic moments, different things that he was involved in that I feel like maybe don't necessarily get overlooked, but when you put them all together into, this nice concise package that we've been presented with here tonight, it really makes you go, wow, this guy is a major influence on pro wrestling history.
Major. Steve, what do you Steve, you loved him as a character.
Yeah.
You and I both, it was funny that you brought up earlier, because you and I were the first people to kind of start turning on the good guys because we were so sick of them. But Steve, I was really floored. I mean, I usually send the guys notes. I only had 2 pages of notes, but there was so much depth in these notes versus some of the other ones that I'm in awe.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I grew up, like, the vignettes hooked me because, again, like I said earlier, I was like migrated towards the heels, and I loved arrogant heels. It's just why William Regal is a favorite, which is why, you name it, Rick Martel, Mr. Perfect. These are among my favorites. But anyway, yeah, and he was good, and I remember that I was one of the 30 million watching that. And I got so excited thinking that DiBiase pulled it off. And, like, of course he doesn't get rewarded the title, but but it's, and yet Andre, his one world title, even if it was for like 10 seconds, whatever it's yeah, and I mean, we don't even have time to talk about, and it's not worth talking about per se compared to all these other things. But then he goes over to WCW and like is part of the NWO angle.
Yes, I mean, yes,
And I
he
can
was.
still
You're right.
picture his debut because NWO is going strong, Hogan turned, all that. And then there's just a random episode of Nitro where they show the crowd and Ted DiBiase sitting in the crowd, and everybody's like, why is he here? And he put I'm gonna describe this because this isn't a video podcast, but he puts each finger up. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he repeats 4, and then the announcers are like, well, is he part of the Horsemen, but he was essentially foreshadowing he's the fourth man in the NWO.
Yep.
And he manages his hated foe Hulk Hogan, and eventually turns babyface, but by that point it was kind of, the angle was kind of, but still, yeah, so he was part of the NWO, one of the biggest storylines of all time.
Yep. I mean, I don't know, I think there's so much about some of these wrestlers that are just hidden gems that, I mean, I even watched just a couple of his matches. He did this with Dirty Dick Slater back in the day, and it was when they were in Mid-South, and just Mike brought this up earlier, but just an amazing worker. Was no high spots, 0 high spots, all ground and pound, holds, different things. And then inevitably he would cheat and do something dastardly, and the place would just go berserkers. And he was such a great worker, and sold. Oh goodness, such a good artist.
He had amazing ring awareness. He like, the ring was like his stage. Like you said, he didn't really do high spots, but he was an unbelievable performer. Probably my favorite is when he gets thrown into the turnbuckle and then he kind of like marches out into the middle and then just face plants hard.
Oh, classic.
Or when he gets clotheslined, he keeps his neck really stiff and he like is flat as a board. It's almost like a 2x4 getting flipped over, or like the Highland Games when they throw like those huge telephone poles, like he's stiff like that. I love that. And then, I just remember as a kid when he got paired up with Irwin R. Shyster, I was fascinated by Irwin R. Shyster. I didn't even know what the IRS was because, I didn't know anything about taxes. But what a great streamlined thing, Money Incorporated. Yeah, he's propped up a lot of people. He's kind of like... he's a glue guy. He's just another one of those glue guys that really have contributed a lot to the business.
Analogy.
And like even today, like you kind of see his influence in MJF's character a little bit too. The arrogance,
for sure.
The riches, the confidence, the I'm better than you. He had the I'm better than you and it mentality 30 years before MJF made it.
Before MJF was alive.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the dude's a trailblazer. We're so thankful that he's coming to Crusherfest and honoring, the people with his time to tell more stories. I can't wait to maybe get into some of these in-depth questions that we can have that will spring off of this show. But I think before we hit the road here, we should probably play that vignette of that young man bouncing the basketball here in Milwaukee. Now that we kind of broke it down, we actually had this submitted to the mailbag a long while back, and I was like, well, you kind of have to see it for it to like give the same for it to have some resonance with people. But now that we kind of broke it down and went in depth with it, I think it'd be fun to play it just so you can hear the crowd become unglued, as Gary said. So before we hit the road, why don't we play this classic vignette from Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, when he screws over a 5-year-old boy of $500. Let's take a listen.
Looks like a lot of money to most of you people. As I look around the crowd, it's obvious to me that most of you would do just about anything for a little bit of my money. And I'll tell you what, being the generous individual that I am, I'm going to give somebody here the opportunity. Look at that, Virgil. Look at the hands waving already. They all want a shot at the money. I'm going to give somebody here the opportunity to make some of my money. Now, all you got to do to make some of my money tonight is bounce the ball. Now, I know that's real difficult for most of you people because you can't chew gum and walk at the same time, but all you got to do is bounce the ball. Now, who wants to make $500? Look at that, Virgil. Look at the poverty. Let's look around here. Let's see who we're going to pick here. Let me see. Okay, we got us a little basketball player right here. Security, let's bring him up here. Bring him up here, right here. Come right on up here, son. Okay. Get around here where I can see you now. What's your name, son? Sean. Okay, Sean. Can you dribble a basketball? You can dribble a basketball, okay. Virgil, give him the basketball. Now let me see. Can you dribble that basketball 10 times? Let me see you dribble the basketball 10 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good. Oh. Okay, pick the ball up, Virgil. Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Sean. If you can dribble this basketball 15 times consecutively without missing, look at here, I'm going to give you $500. Now, I know you and your family can use $500. I can tell by looking at you that you can use a lot more than $500. Okay. Virgil, give me the basketball. Okay, Sean, 15 times. Ready, go. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Oops! Oh. We didn't get to 15, Sean. You didn't get to 15, did you? No. He didn't make 15. And you know what that means? What that means, Sean, is you've got to learn a hard, cruel fact of life. When you don't do the job right, you don't get paid.
One of the all-time greatest spots ever, eh, boys?
Well, you know, if you don't do the job right, you don't get paid. And, I mean, there's a lesson to be learned, a life lesson.
And
was that in the Mecca?
It was.
Was that in the Mecca?
It was at the Mecca.
So,
it was at the Mecca.
So Austin 316 was born in the Mecca as well.
Yep. You're right.
There was that classic moment. So there's a lot of monumental things that kind of happen in careers here in Milwaukee.
Well, in Milwaukee, that's when the Mega Powers broke up here, like Hogan and Macho Man. So there's some big things that happen here.
And that was when that was just after the world famous Bradley Center was built.
Right.
And they did the backstage, you got lust in your eyes, you know, that whole thing with them fighting was in the Bradley Center.
Yep. Brings back great memories. I think a lot of this has to do with probably just a mentality that we have here in Milwaukee that spurs these great things. Because I know we'll meet a lot of them at Crusherfest coming up June 3rd and 4th, where all these legends will be. And I think there's going to be a lot of people walking around doing some of this.
What's that?
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I've only been on the podcast a couple times. I can't remember. What is it?
I don't know. I think I'll just point out to him and be like, "Hey, bud, are you staying humble, staying hungry, and staying hard?"
Oh, Triple H.
Yeah, woo.
Always gets his way.
Money, 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 money.
This is such good shit.